Is the jeweler who makes a fine watch responsible for its movements? Yes, he brought the watch into existence. But after the hands are set in motion, the watch moves on its own. The watchmaker may not even know that it is still ticking. He has gone on to other tasks. Is God a watchmaker? Does he create the world, set it in motion, and then abandon it to run on its own? We are often told that the American founders and framers believed in a watchmaker God, but what evidence is there for this claim? This is the American Deist. In what follows, I show that the widespread belief that our founders and framers believed in a watchmaker God is not only false, but a fabrication devised by those who reject government by the people. A God who takes no interest in the world, exercises no providential care over creation, and ignores the lives of human beings, is a God who might as well not even exist. Indeed, the watchmaker God is little more than a placeholder for atheism. He is an absentee landlord who does not take care of his property. He is the God of Supreme Indifference. The idea of a distant and unconcerned God is supposedly the very definition of deism, but as it turns out, none of the American Deists actually held this view. Why do so many people believe this falsehood? To expose it, we will have to become philosophers ourselves, at least for a little while. We will need to contrast two very different philosophies of nature. Under one, nature exists as a gigantic machine. Machines are amazing inventions, but they only have the purposes that we attribute to them. The automobile engine, for example, enables us to travel at great speeds, cover enormous distances, and move heavy loads. But these are purposes that we impose on this machine. If God's creation is like a machine, then nature will also have no inherent purposes, even as it automatically executes those tasks imposed on it by God, its maker. Just as a well-oiled machine runs without the need for human intervention, so nature will run without divine intervention. The laws of physics will be sufficient for its operation. But there is another possibility. Nature may exist as a teleological system. The word teleology derives from the Greek telos, meaning purpose, and logos, meaning study or thought. Teleology is the study of the purposes of nature. On this view, nature is not a machine, but is drawn toward the good under the direction of the Divine Providence. God does not impose purposes on nature, as does a watchmaker, but draws them out of nature, in the same way that a plant unfolds its leaves under the influence of the sun. Under this view, the purposes of nature are direct evidence of divine governance. God has not abandoned the world, but exercises providential care over it by causing nature to fulfill its inherent purposes. Which of these two views was held by our founders and framers? Perhaps we should first ask ourselves this question. After all, we are citizens of a republic, and how we envision nature may have some bearing on what it means to speak of natural rights. Do purposes exist in nature or not? Consider the humble spider. When the spider spins its web, is it acting for a purpose? Under the mechanical view of nature, the answer is plainly no. The spider is just a tiny machine that moves at the direction of its material parts, like the engine of a car. Is capturing a fly good for the spider? Again, the answer is no. There are no purposes in nature. Richard Dawkins, a well-known materialist of our day, argues in his book The Blind Watchmaker that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Spiders appear to act in purposeful ways, but the materialist understands that this is an illusion. The spider's behavior is just a conglomeration of mechanical motions acting under the blind impulses of physical law. But what if common sense is correct? What if purposes really do exist in nature? If so, then the spider acts in accord with its nature when it spins its web and catches its prey. By fulfilling this purpose, it secures the good. So too does the plant that stretches out its leaves to the sun. If everything in nature seeks the good, then is it not obvious that this is God's intention for us as well? God does not add purposes to the outside of nature, as does a watchmaker, but draws purposes out of nature, as all things strive to secure the good. Nature moves toward the good under the direction of the Divine Providence. As rational creatures, we too seek the good. We pursue happiness, for example, because God has established it as one of the fundamental purposes of human nature. Life, liberty, and happiness are the aims of human action because they fulfill our nature. We establish government for the purpose of securing these goods, goods that God has made evident to reason in nature. When the Declaration of Independence speaks of self-evident truths, it does not refer to Newtonian mechanics, but to those laws of nature that perfect the social order. The philosophy of the Republic rests on the teleological conception of nature, not the mechanical. God has not abandoned the cosmos, but has made his will known to us through nature. We need only exercise reason, reflect on the order of all things to the good, and understand that we have the right to secure our own good under the laws of nature and of nature's God. But let's set aside the philosophical inquiry and turn to the historical evidence. In a letter written to John Adams, Jefferson spoke of the necessity of a superintending power to keep the universe in its course and order. In that same letter, he described God as the preserver, regulator, and regenerator of all things in nature. That doesn't sound like a watchmaker God. When Jefferson's nemesis Napoleon Bonaparte was imprisoned on the island of Elba, he wrote to George Ticknor that this event proves we have a God in heaven, that he is just and not careless of what passes in this world. God is not careless of what passes in this world. Doesn't Jefferson realize that he believes in a watchmaker God? In his notes on Virginia, Jefferson warned that God would eventually eradicate slavery by supernatural interference. The Almighty has no attribute which can take side with us in such a contest. God's justice, Jefferson continued, cannot sleep forever. Here again is a direct contradiction to the claim that Thomas Jefferson believed in a watchmaker God. James Madison, the principal author of our Constitution, spoke of God as the governor of the universe in his memorial and remonstrance against religious assessments. Why is God a governor if he does not govern? In the Federalist Papers, Madison remarked on how God had repeatedly intervened on behalf of the American cause during both the War of Independence and the Constitutional Convention. You have been fed a falsehood. Read the founders and framers. Read Jefferson, Madison, Paine, Franklin, Washington, and the rest. You will not find a single reference to a divine watchmaker. Our Declaration of Independence speaks of God as the Divine Providence. The Great Seal of the United States displays the eye of Providence, not that of a watchmaker. A watchmaker God does not watch. So who did advance the idea of a watchmaker God? In fact, it was advanced by those hostile to government by the people. Thomas Hobbes famously said that God has not inscribed any order of moral law into nature. Therefore, the state of nature is a war of all against all. The security of the people can only be found under the forceful hand of an all-powerful tyrant. David Hume, in his essay On Suicide, argued that the providence of the Deity appears not immediately in any operation, but governs everything by those general and immutable laws which have been established from the beginning of time. God has left us with no indication of how he wishes us to govern ourselves. He gives us instead only the impersonal laws of physics. Thus the man who stabs himself in the heart does not violate the law of nature. The blade will plunge into his body to the depth dictated by the law of inertia. He will fall to the ground at the speed demanded by gravity, and the blood will flow from his body at the rate set down by fluid dynamics. Where, asked Hume, are any laws of nature broken? The only guides to moral conduct, Hume said, are our feelings, desires, and emotions. Given the violent and conflicting passions that surge through the human heart, and the lack of any rational standard that is evident to reason in nature, the people must place their trust in a powerful earthly authority who will force everyone to behave. The claim that nature is nothing more than a sophisticated machine is the denial that the people are capable of self-government. If there is no objective moral order inscribed into nature by God, then the people cannot use reason to enact laws that reflect nature's inherent purposes. The powerful must assume authority and rule according to their own arbitrary designs. As a young man, Jefferson read David Hume. He later regretted the length of time, the research and reflection which were necessary to eradicate the poison he had instilled into my mind. He further complained that Hume continues to be put into the hands of all our young people and to infect them with the poison of his own principles of government. So, the next time someone tells you that the founders and framers worshipped a watchmaker god, remember what you are being asked to swallow.